What's going on, everybody? Thank you all for joining me today. If you haven't already, please make sure you hit the like button because that is the most important thing you can do for me on this channel. What it does is that it helps to make sure that those who are subscribed to the channel will indeed get their notifications, and it also helps to push this video through the YouTube algorithm. Secondly, if you're new to the channel, or maybe you've been ghost watching the channel for quite some time now, please do me a favor and yourself a favor by hitting the subscribe button as well as the bell notification next to the subscribe button so you can be notified whenever I release a new video. And lastly, please make sure you share this video out on your social media platform to inform your family and friends on this news and information, and it also helps give me a boost in the YouTube algorithm as well. And with the introduction out of the way, let's now get into today's news. And what I want to discuss today is where Biden's migrants are going, because they are starting to fan out to different locations. As we all know, currently as it stands, New York City is no longer New York City. New York City has turned into Gotham City. When you take all of the usual big city foolishness and nonsense that happens in a city like a New York or Chicago and many others, but specifically as it pertains to New York, you take all the crime and murder and things of that nature that typically happens in these big cities, and you take that and place on top of it imported crime from Biden's migrants who are now in New York City of committing violent crimes, right? And then you take the fact that on top of that, you have now the mayor, Eric Adams, openly calling for NYPD to be able to collaborate with ICE by making an amendment to the sanctuary city laws. And we also have to take into consideration the fact that migrant shelters in New York City are increasingly becoming more and more violent, so much so that the mayor of New York is now installing metal detectors inside of multiple migrant shelters throughout the city of New York. So when I say New York City has turned into Gotham City and that their only hope is Batman, that's just the fact of the matter. But with that being said, and with New York being the way it is, this now is causing migrants to fan out and explore other options, to leave New York, those who are already there, and for word of mouth, because word of mouth spreads fast. For those that haven't even crossed the border yet, they're finding out that New York might not be the place to go right now. So let's get into the information and data that's going to inform us on where Biden's migrants are heading. And to do that, what I want to do is head into this Bloomberg article here titled, "This is where new migrants are going when they reach the US." And spoiler alert, they're going to Chicago and Denver. Let's get into this article. Much of the angst around the impact of newly arrived migrants to the U.S. has focused on the biggest cities in New York, Illinois, and Colorado, and immigration court records suggest that those states are indeed among the most affected by the surge. The data also signals that Texas and Florida, which have long complained about the cost of absorbing newcomers, are still among the top destination of migrants. The number of migrants listing an address in Illinois for their immigration court cases jumped ninefold in 2023 compared with just 2 years earlier. The increase was sevenfold in Colorado. And I want to scroll down to this data point here that reads, "The biggest changes are far from the southern border. Percentage increase in the number of new immigration court cases from 2021 to 2023 among states with the most cases last year is Illinois with 821%, Colorado with 665%, and New York with 416%. So Illinois is in the lead. And when we say Illinois, we're talking about Chicago. Chicago is in the lead, with Colorado, meaning Denver, in second place. So these are the two cities that are starting to see the largest influx of migrants coming in. And we can expect for these numbers to skyrocket and go up the closer we get to the summer, because the buses coming to these cities have slowed down a bit over the course of the winter. But as the weather starts to change and things start to heat up in cities like Chicago and Denver, we can expect an increase in more buses coming to the city. And with that being said, the number of migrants are going to skyrocket. Now, another data point that I scrolled past, but I do want to go back over to it, is this right here, where it says new migrants made up more than 2% of people in some counties. Number of migrants with new immigration court cases in 2023. And it shows here Queens, Miami-Dade, and Denver are among the counties with highest shares of migrants per capita. So they have a population count of 2% as it pertains to Biden's migrants. 2% in these areas. To me, that's just astonishing. That level of growth within a specific population in such a short period of time. And as you can see here in the center, Cook County, which is the county that Chicago was in Illinois, has a very large percentage as well. They are currently at 1%, but they are on their way to 2% if these numbers hold true that we see here concerning the number of migrants that are reporting themselves as living in the state of Illinois as they send out their information concerning their court cases. To be sure, the data isn't perfect. Relying on the addresses the migrants provide to U.S. officials who are managing their immigration court cases. Sometimes the new arrivals end up going elsewhere or don't yet know where they'll end up. An audit completed in September found that the U.S. Border Patrol records addresses for 18% of migrants were missing, invalid, or not legitimate residential locations. Still, analysts say the immigration court cases provide a general idea of how newcomers are distributed around the country. And I find it very interesting that they would use the word newcomers, because that is actually what Joe Biden described the illegal immigrants as well. He described them not as illegal aliens, not as illegal immigrants, but he described them as newcomers. Now, this piece of information that I'm getting ready to read to you all in this article is what I found was the most interesting piece of information in here. And it reads as such: records also show that the immigrants are increasingly arriving at the border in family clusters, a departure from the past when they were typically single adults. Let's talk about that. And I've spoken on that before in the past, but I want to speak on that again. Immigrants are starting to show up as family clusters more and more, as opposed to single adults. I don't believe a good deal of these so-called migrants, Biden's migrants, are actually families when they come through, because you can't prove any of that to be true. You are unable to prove that if the children that they're at the border with are actually their biological children. There is no marriage certificate that you can look at that says that the man and the woman are actually married. There is no identification card that you can look at from their foreign country, or from their country, I should say, where you can match the ID to the birth certificate, or you can match the ID, I should say, to the marriage license and say, okay, you are who you say you are, and you guys are actually married, and you have a birth certificate for your children, and the name of the parent on the birth certificate matches the name that's on this ID, which matches the photo that I'm looking at, which is you. None of that is available. You just have people showing up at the border saying, we're family. And you're supposed to take them on their word, which apparently we do. And the reason that we're seeing an increase in family clusters versus single adults is because families receive special treatment. Families get to be placed in the front of the line once they get here and start applying for programs in places like New York and Chicago, where they're giving out free housing and paying people's rent, right? They get placed in the front of the line in places like Brunswick, Maine, where they're handing out apartment buildings and they're covering the migrants' rent for 2 years at a time. You get placed in the front of the line when you have a family. This is why we're starting to see this increase. And really what this is an abuse of the kindness, we can say, of the United States. It's an abuse of that kindness, right? It's an abuse of it. And that's exactly what it is, because once again, we don't know who's who. You don't know who's coming into the country. They come here with no identification. There's no way to prove whether or not they are a family or they aren't. There's no way to prove if those are actually their children or they aren't. You can't prove any of it. It's all game at the end of the day, because if I can't prove these things to be true, then I'm going to assume you're lying, because you're already breaking the law by crossing the border illegally, engaging in mass asylum fraud. And that's what's happening in this country right now. Everyone taking advantage of this asylum fraud that's being perpetuated by Biden, who refuses to close the border. We literally have American citizen families in the streets of these major cities all across the country, and they can't find housing. But millions of Biden's migrants are claiming asylum falsely and are getting placed in housing across this country for free. For free. And I'll leave you with that. So that does it for today's news. Thank you for joining me today. On your way out, please hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, share this video on your social media platforms, and don't forget to follow me on Telegram at TD Media Group. The link to my Telegram is in the description box below, and it will be pinned in the comment section below as well. I will catch you all next time. Peace.